Hello, and welcome to the Psychology of Us with Professor RJ Starr. I'm your host, RJ Starr, and today we're going to explore something that affects all of us in ways we might not even realize: the psychology of political theater and its profound impact on our society. Welcome to the Psychology of Us, where we explore the fascinating ways our minds shape our lives, relationships, and the world around us. I'm Professor RJ Starr, your guide on this journey into the heart of human behavior. Whether you're a psychology student, enthusiast, or simply someone curious about why we think, feel, and act the way we do, this podcast is for you. Each episode will dive into topics that touch our everyday lives, unpacking theories, exploring intriguing questions, and offering insights that help us better understand ourselves and one another. Throughout our time together, I'll also invite your thoughts, questions, and topic suggestions. You can email me at profrjstarr, and that's star with 2 R's, at outlook.com, profrjstarr@outlook.com. Your feedback will shape future episodes and help ensure this podcast feels like a conversation between us. So, let's begin this journey together. Get comfortable, stay curious, and let's discover the psychology of us. Now, when I say political theater, I'm not just talking about what you might see on the evening news or in the headlines. I'm talking about the drama, the spectacle that surrounds politics today. It's the performance, the media frenzy, the debates that feel less like discussions of policy and more like scripted drama. It's all around us, shaping our understanding of the world and the people in it. We see it in election cycles, in campaigns, and even in social media. But what is it about this political theater that draws us in? And what is it doing to us, both as individuals and as a society? I remember when I was younger, I would watch debates on television, politicians standing face to face, throwing barbs at one another in a very respectable tone. At the time, I didn't quite understand it, but I felt the tension. It was a spectacle, one I could almost feel in the air, and like many, I found myself caught up in the drama. It was like a show, right? Where I, as a viewer, was invited to pick sides and form an opinion based on what I saw in that carefully crafted, often exaggerated moment. But the truth is, political theater does much more than entertain. It influences us, changes the way we think, and ultimately shapes the way we interact with each other in our communities. And that's what I want to talk to you about today. I'm going to unpack the psychology behind this phenomena so you can understand not only how it works, but why it works and how it impacts all of us, whether we realize it or not. Let's talk about the psychological mechanisms of political theater. Political theater isn't just about the drama we see on our screens. It's about how that drama plays out into the deepest parts of our psychology. There are several psychological mechanisms at work when we engage with political spectacle, and these mechanisms help explain why we're drawn to it, why we feel so strongly about it, and why it often shapes the way we see the world. Let's start with something called cognitive biases. You've probably heard of biases before, but in the context of political theater, they're crucial. Cognitive biases are mental shortcuts our brains use to make decisions quickly. But the problem is, they often lead us to distorted conclusions. One of the most prominent biases at play here is confirmation bias. Confirmation bias is when we seek out information that supports our existing beliefs and ignore or dismiss anything that challenges them. Think about it here. How many times have you found yourself agreeing with a politician or media outlet because they're saying what you already believe? That's confirmation bias at work. And political theater is designed to exploit this bias. Politicians know how to frame their messages to resonate with their audience's existing beliefs, which creates a sense of validation. But this is where things get tricky. When we consume political media, we're not just processing facts. We're processing emotions, identities, and social pressures. This leads us to something in psychology we call social identity theory. It's a concept that suggests we define ourselves based on the groups we belong to, whether that's political parties, cultural movements, or even local communities and lifestyle choices. When we see a political figure perform on stage, we don't just see a candidate. We see a symbol of our social group. That's why political events like debates, rallies, or media moments become so powerful. They allow us to reinforce our identity. If our group is under threat, or if we feel our values are being challenged, we react. It's no longer just a disagreement over politics. It's an existential defense of who we are. I'm sure many of you can recall a time when a political moment felt like more than just a piece of news. It felt like a fight, a battle, like the stakes were personal. I've certainly experienced it. I remember during the early 2000s, there was a time when political debates felt like life or death to me. I wasn't just watching a debate. I was watching a contest of values that reflected who I was, what I believed, and where I saw myself in the world. That's the power of social identity theory. It shapes how we view and react to political theater. Another psychological theory we can apply here is groupthink. Groupthink happens when individuals in a group prioritize harmony and conformity over critical thinking. Look to your own experience and see this play out. In political theater, this is what happens when people stop questioning the messages they're receiving from their political leaders or media outlets because they're more focused on staying aligned with their group. They start to believe the narrative, even if that narrative doesn't make sense. It's easier to go along with the crowd than to stand up and ask tough questions. This is especially dangerous in political theater because it can create an environment where ideas go unchallenged and divisions between groups become even more entrenched. An example of groupthink can be found in the lead-up to major political movements such as Brexit. In the run-up to the Brexit referendum, there was a massive rallying around emotional rhetoric. The message became about defending national pride and identity. But the problem with groupthink is that it oversimplifies complex issues. People start buying into the narrative, not because it was necessarily the best course of action, but because it felt like the right thing to do in the context of their group. The outcome, as we now know, was far more complex and has led to regret and division. By understanding these psychological mechanisms, confirmation bias, social identity theory, and groupthink, we can begin to understand why political theater has such a deep impact on us. It's not just about what politicians say. It's about how they shape our identities, how they manipulate our biases, and how they influence the groups we belong to. And when you add in the speed and intensity of modern media, you have a perfect storm for psychological influence.
Why does it feel like bad behavior is everywhere? From viral public outbursts to the daily incivility we encounter at work, online, or even in our communities, it seems like something fundamental is shifting in the way we interact with each other. In Public Outrage, Why Bad Behavior is on the Rise, existential psychologist and Professor RJ Starr takes readers on a compelling journey into the psychological forces driving this troubling trend. With a sharp focus on human behavior, Starr explores the societal changes that have fueled a culture of outrage and disconnection, shining a light on how we got here. But this book isn't just about identifying the problem, it's about finding a path forward. Starr examines how today's fast-paced, high-pressure world amplifies feelings of anger and division, and more importantly, how empathy can serve as the antidote. Drawing on psychological research, real-world examples, and accessible insights, he shows how understanding others' experiences, without judgment, can not only transform our interactions, but also repair the fabric of our communities. Public outrage is more than an analysis. It's a guide to overcoming the anger and division so prevalent in modern life. By shifting focus from outrage to connection, Starr provides readers with the tools to rebuild civility in a world that feels increasingly fractured. This book is for anyone who is ready to understand the roots of today's bad behavior, embrace the power of empathy, and become part of a solution that moves society toward unity and compassion. Public Outrage. Why Bad Behavior is on the Rise is now available on Kindle, Apple Books, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Smashwords, and many more international booksellers. Don't miss the chance to be part of the change. Get your copy today and join the movement toward a more compassionate world.
Now that we've explored the ways in which political theater impacts society and our individual mental health, let's dive a bit deeper into the psychological theories that help explain why it has such a profound effect. These are theories that shape not just our engagement with political moments, but our very understanding of them. Understanding these concepts gives us a clearer picture of how political theater works on us, not just as passive consumers of media, but as active participants in a larger social drama. One of the most influential psychological theories in this context is framing theory. At its core, framing theory suggests that how information is presented or framed influences how we interpret and respond to it. This is particularly relevant in political theater because the way an issue, a candidate, or a policy is framed can completely change how we feel about it. Think about a political scandal or a major policy change. The framing of that event can either highlight its negative consequences or emphasize its positive potential. For instance, a policy might be framed as a necessary reform, or it might be framed as a disaster in the making. Politicians, the media, and even social media influencers use these frames to shape our perception, often without us even realizing it. Framing is everywhere now. It's one of the most powerful tools of political theater and advertising. The same set of facts can be presented in drastically different ways depending on the narrative frame. I've seen this firsthand in the way certain events are discussed in the media. Take, for example, the portrayal of economic issues during election years. The framing can go from something like, the economy is booming under this administration, to the economy is in crisis, it's a disaster, depending on the speaker's political agenda. The facts remain the same, but the emotional resonance and the interpretations we draw from them are shaped entirely by how the message is framed. Another crucial theory that we talked about is social identity theory. As I mentioned, social identity theory suggests that we define ourselves by the groups we belong to. But what happens when those groups become deeply intertwined with political identity? Political theater amplifies this effect by creating clear group divisions. Democrat versus Republican, liberal versus conservative, or even more polarized labels like patriots versus radicals. These divisions create a sense of us versus them where the stakes feel much higher than just winning an election or passing a bill. It becomes a matter of defending the very identity of your group. It's not just about policy anymore. It's about defending your way of life, your values, and your sense of belonging. And when our identity is so closely tied to political groups, we begin to view every political moment through a lens of loyalty and group cohesion. We start to see other groups not as fellow citizens, but as threats to our identity. This creates a psychological environment where cooperation and compromise are more difficult, and political discourse becomes more about maintaining one's identity than about finding common ground. One of the most notable consequences of this is the rise of tribalism. We've all witnessed it, especially in the past few decades, as political rhetoric has become more charged. People become so invested in their political identity that they begin to disregard information that contradicts it. The psychological need to fit in with the group outweighs the pursuit of objective truth. And this, in turn, reinforces division and makes it harder to engage in meaningful and respectful conversations across party lines. Now let's consider the psychological phenomena of groupthink, a theory originally introduced by Irving Janis in the 1970s. Groupthink occurs when the desire for group harmony and conformity leads individuals to make irrational or poor decisions. In political theater, this happens when people in a political group become so focused on staying in line with their party's narrative that they stop critically evaluating the information or ideas being presented. I've seen this play out in the context of political movements where a leader's word becomes gospel, and followers, whether they're on social media or in larger groups, begin to parrot back the same messages without question. The result? Ideas that may have once been challenged and refined are left unexamined, and critical thinking takes a backseat to group loyalty. It's a powerful force that perpetuates political division and undermines the kind of constructive debate that is necessary for a healthy democracy. To illustrate this, let's think about a recent event where groupthink was at play, perhaps the rise of a populist movement. Supporters of this movement may have been so caught up in the rhetoric, the emotions, and the us versus them framing that they stopped questioning the messages they were receiving. The group dynamic took over, and critical thinking became less important than maintaining group cohesion. This is a classic example of groupthink in action, and it highlights how psychological forces within political theater can derail thoughtful, objective analysis. By understanding these psychological theories, framing theory, social identity theory, and groupthink, we can start to see how political theater manipulates our perceptions and behaviors. These aren't just abstract concepts. They are active forces shaping how we think, how we vote, and how we engage with others in our society. The next time you see a political performance, whether it's a debate or a viral social media post, remember that the psychological mechanisms behind it are not just about winning an argument. They're about shaping your identity, influencing your emotions, and pulling you into the theater. Now let's talk about the impact of political theater on society. Political theater isn't just an abstract concept. It has real, tangible effects on society. It shapes how we interact with one another, how we form our own opinions, and even how we perceive the world around us. In fact, the impact of political theater goes far beyond what we might imagine. Let's explore some of the most significant ways political theater affects our society, beginning with how it contributes to polarization and division. When we watch political theater unfold, whether it's a heated debate or a campaign ad or a viral social media moment, something powerful happens. It draws a line in the sand. It creates a stark contrast between us and them. And that line doesn't just exist in the political world, it seeps into our daily lives. We start to see the world as divided between those who are on our side and those who are not. And the more we consume political theater, the deeper that division grows. This happens at both the conscious and subconscious level. It's important to recognize that this isn't just happening on a macro level, though. It's happening in our communities, in our families, and even in our friendships. You've probably noticed how political discussions can quickly escalate, turning into arguments or even estrangements. It's no longer just about disagreeing on policies. It's about questioning one another's values, loyalty, and identity. This polarization makes it harder to find common ground, which is essential for functioning as a society. Instead of looking for solutions, we look for enemies. We stop seeing the person on the other side of the aisle as a human being with their own fears and motivations. Political theater amplifies this effect because it strips down complex issues into dramatic black and white narratives and easy to digest sound bites. On a more personal level, political theater also affects our mental health. It's hard to overstate just how much the constant influx of political drama can influence our emotional and psychological well-being. Think about it. When you're glued to your phone, refreshing the news feed, or watching the latest political meltdown, you're not just processing information, you're processing emotions, anxiety, excitement, anger, hope. These emotions are stirred up as we watch politicians perform, often at the expense of our own peace of mind. I know I've felt this firsthand. During the particularly intense last couple of particularly intense election cycles, I found myself overwhelmed by the emotional highs and lows. The news was a constant source of stress, and it became harder to focus on anything else. It felt like the outcome of these events would determine my future, my values, my life. And that kind of emotional engagement takes a toll. The more we tie our identities to political theater, the more fragile our emotional state can become. This is especially true in today's world, where we're constantly bombarded by information, often presented in the most sensational, dramatic way possible. This brings me to another point, the psychological concept of learned helplessness. When we feel like the political theater around us is out of our control, we can begin to feel powerless, like nothing we do will change the course of events. We start to believe that our voices don't matter and that the system is rigged. Some people even tell us that that's the case, and that the world is simply too chaotic to make a difference. This mindset can lead to apathy or cynicism, where we disengage entirely from the democratic political process. And when people stop believing they have an impact, the system becomes even more disconnected from the needs of its citizens. I've seen this in my own life as well. There was a time when I became so disillusioned by the constant bickering and sensationalism that I just stopped paying attention. It felt like nothing would ever change, and honestly, it was easier to ignore it altogether. But what I didn't realize at the time was that this was a perfect example of learned helplessness. I had surrendered my agency, allowing political theater to dictate my emotional response, and I had stopped actively engaging with the world around me. And I've seen this in many of my associates, friends, family, colleagues, students, you name it. So what can we do about all this? How do we protect ourselves from the negative impact of political theater while still staying informed and engaged? That's something we'll explore now. But before we move on, let's take a moment to reflect on the bigger picture. Political theater is not just a distraction. It's a force that psychologically shapes how we think, how we feel, and how we relate to one another. And it's up to us to decide how we want to engage with it. Now I want to talk about the role of media in political theater. Media plays an absolutely central role. It's no longer just about politicians delivering speeches or participating in debates. It's about how these moments are captured, framed, and spread across various platforms. Media is both the stage and the audience. It amplifies the drama, creating a spectacle that reverberates throughout society. The psychological impact of this is profound, and it's something that we all experience whether we're aware of it or not. First, let's talk about the influence of social media. Excuse me. Social media platforms like Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, TikTok, where political theater plays out in real time. These platforms act as a massive echo chamber, amplifying messages, creating viral moments, and allowing us to feel like we're participating in the event as it unfolds. The ability to tweet, comment, or share a post means that every political moment is turned into a spectacle, one that we can react to immediately. This creates an environment where events aren't just covered, they're personalized, dramatized, and distorted in the name of engagement. We've all seen the posts, the memes, and the viral videos that emerge from a political event, and they usually don't paint the most nuanced or accurate picture. Instead, they often focus on the most dramatic, most inflammatory moments, the things that will get the most clicks, likes, or shares. And this isn't by accident. Social media algorithms are designed to highlight content that elicits an emotional response, whether that's anger, joy, or outrage. The more emotional the response, the more likely it is to spread, and the more likely we're to get caught up in the frenzy. As consumers of media, we begin to see politics not as a serious, thoughtful process, but as a series of emotional highs and lows. We're not engaging with policy, we're reacting to performances. This is the world of political theater, and it thrives on our emotional reactions, which are amplified by the viral nature of social media. It's important to consider echo chambers, those pockets of the internet where we're only exposed to ideas and viewpoints that align with our own. The algorithms that govern our social media feeds are designed to show us content that we're most likely to engage with based on our past behaviors. This means we end up in these digital echo chambers, surrounded by people who think like us, speak like us, and share our opinions. And when we're in these echo chambers, we're not exposed to the diversity of thought and experience that is necessary for healthy political discourse. And this applies no matter what side of the political spectrum you are on. This podcast, this episode is not about a specific political side. It's about the psychology behind this. Echo chambers don't just reinforce our political beliefs, they also distort our perceptions of reality. When we only hear one side of the story, we start to believe that the other side is either wrong, misguided, or even dangerous. This leads to increased polarization and a deeper division between different political groups. Rather than seeing opposing viewpoints as opportunities for discussion, we begin to view them as threats to our identity. And this is exactly what political theater, particularly in the media, thrives on. It's about creating an emotional connection. And once that connection is made, it's much easier to divide and conquer. I've seen this personally in my own social media interactions. There was a time when I felt caught in a particular echo chamber, surrounded by posts that validated my political views. It felt comfortable, even safe. But I began to realize how limited my perspective had become. I wasn't hearing from people who disagreed with me. And as a result, my understanding of the broader political landscape started to shrink. I became more entrenched in my own beliefs, less willing to listen, and more likely to view the other side as a threat, rather than as people with valid concerns and experiences. But it's not just social media. The broader media landscape, television, radio, online news outlets, also plays a crucial role in shaping the political theater we consume. The framing of news stories by the media has a powerful impact on how we perceive events. We see politicians, policies, and public figures not just through the lens of their actions, but through the lens of how the media chooses to present them. The same event can be framed as a triumph, a scandal, a disaster, or a victory, depending on the outlet you're watching. The framing of the event affects not only our emotions, but also our decision-making. It can even shape our voting behavior. Take, for example, the coverage of a political candidate's rally. One network might focus on the enthusiasm of the crowd, framing it as a sign of the candidate's growing popularity. Another might focus on the controversial comments made by the candidate, framing it as a potential scandal. Both of these perspectives offer different interpretations of the same event, and the way we respond depends largely on which media outlet we consume. In the end, the media's role in political theater is not just about covering events, it's about shaping the narrative. And when the narrative is shaped to provoke an emotional response, it becomes more difficult for us to engage with politics in a thoughtful, rational way. We become consumers of drama rather than participants in a democratic process. We feel more connected to the spectacle, but less connected to the issues that really matter. So what do we do with all this? How do we protect ourselves from being manipulated by the media's portrayal of political events while staying informed and engaged? It's a question we'll tackle next. But before we move on, I want you to think about your own relationship with the media. How much of your political perspective is shaped by what you see in the media? How much of it is shaped by your own critical thinking and personal values? As we conclude today's discussion on the psychology of political theater, I want to offer a final reflection. Understanding the psychological forces at play, cognitive biases, social identity, framing, and groupthink gives us the opportunity to step back from the chaos. It allows us to see the bigger picture and recognize that much of what we encounter in political theater isn't about the truth, but about how information is packaged and presented to us. The power of political theater lies in its ability to make us feel something deeply, whether that's anger, fear, or even excitement. These emotions are often manipulated to create a sense of urgency and division, to draw us into the drama. But by understanding these psychological forces, we can make a conscious choice not to fall victim to the manipulation. We don't have to let the noise of the media, the divisiveness of campaigns, or the spectacle of political debates determine our thoughts and actions. Instead, we have the power to engage more thoughtfully, with greater empathy, perspective, and depth. By recognizing the emotional pulls and psychological triggers, we can distance ourselves from the drama and focus on the issues that truly matter. We can engage in conversations that are rooted in understanding rather than in defending our own political identity. We can approach political discourse with the intention of listening and learning, not just winning arguments. And by doing this, we can begin to heal the divisions that political theater often deepens. But it starts with awareness. And that brings me to my call to action for you today. I encourage you to reflect on how political theater influences your own thoughts, your own actions, your own conversations, and your beliefs. Think about the last political issue and media moment that stirred you up. Did you react emotionally, or did you take a step back to process what was truly being said? Are you finding yourself more entrenched in your beliefs, or are you open to seeing things from a different perspective? I want you to ask yourself, how can I contribute to a more balanced, empathetic approach to the issues that matter? How can I foster more productive, respectful conversations about politics in my own life? The next time you're drawn into the drama, remember that you have the choice to engage thoughtfully and intentionally. You can be a part of the conversation in a way that uplifts and unites rather than divides. Thank you for joining me today on The Psychology of Us with Professor RJ Starr. If you have any questions or suggestions for future topics, feel free to reach out to me at profrjstarr@outlook.com. That's Prof. RJ Starr, and Starr has 2 R's, at outlook.com. I look forward to hearing from you. Until next time, take care of your mind and your world will flow.